A love forbidden. The Hamilton estate stood as a monument to power, a fortress of wealth perched atop rolling green hills that overlooked the city like a silent ruler. The mansion, a sprawling architectural masterpiece, was a symbol of influence passed down through generations. Every inch of it, from the towering marble pillars to the golden chandeliers, exuded an air of absolute prestige. For many, stepping inside was a privilege. For Isabel Hamilton, it was a gilded cage. She had been raised to embody perfection, groomed from birth to be the flawless heiress to the Hamilton legacy. Her father, William Hamilton, was a man of calculated precision. He had built his fortune from nothing, clawing his way up the ranks of high society with a sharp mind and an iron will. He was revered in business, feared in competition, and unwavering in his beliefs. For William, life was a strict equation: pedigree, wealth, and status were the ultimate currency. Everything else, especially emotions, was a weakness. Isabel had spent her entire life fulfilling his expectations. From an early age, her world had been dictated by rules. Speak only when necessary. Maintain grace in all circumstances. A Hamilton does not cry. A Hamilton does not fail. She attended elite private schools, studied business and finance, mastered multiple languages, and learned the intricacies of high society etiquette. She had dinner with senators, trained under world-class pianists, and traveled to every luxurious destination imaginable, yet, nothing felt real. Because her entire life had been designed for her, not by her. Her father had already picked her future. She would marry well, likely the son of another billionaire or a rising politician. She would carry on the family name, bear children who would continue the Hamilton dynasty, and take her place as a respectable socialite, standing beside a man of equal status. That was her destiny. At least, it was, until she met Marcus Reed. The unexpected meeting. It happened on a rare evening when Isabel had escaped her family's watchful eyes. While attending a high-profile charity gala, she had grown tired of the endless small talk and empty flattery. Slipping away from the ballroom, she found herself on the quiet balcony, taking a breath of the crisp night air. That's when she heard someone chuckle behind her. "You don't look like you're enjoying yourself." She turned, startled, and found herself looking into the warm, confident eyes of a man she had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in a simple yet impeccably tailored black suit, his dark skin illuminated by the soft glow of the city lights. I just needed a moment," she admitted, not used to being caught off guard. He gave a knowing smile. "Let me guess, one too many conversations about the market or legacy investments?" Isabel laughed softly, surprised at how easily he had read her situation. "You have no idea." "Oh, I do," he said, leaning against the railing. "These events are all about appearances. Everyone pretending to care while secretly competing with each other." She tilted her head, intrigued. "And you? Are you pretending too?" His smile deepened. "Nope. I'm just here for the free food." She laughed again, genuinely this time. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to her like this, with ease, without pretense, without knowing who she was and expecting something in return. "I'm Marcus, by the way," he said, offering his hand. "Isabel," she replied, shaking it. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stir within her, a sense of freedom, a flicker of rebellion. A love that shouldn't have been. That single encounter turned into late-night conversations, secret meetings at art galleries, and long drives to places where no one knew their names. Marcus was unlike anyone she had ever met. He wasn't born into wealth. He had built himself up, starting from nothing. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support him, he had grown up knowing struggle, knowing sacrifice. Yet, instead of bitterness, he carried determination. At just 30, he had founded a revolutionary tech company, creating software that had caught the attention of major investors. He was brilliant, hard-working, and fiercely independent. And most of all, he treated Isabel like a person, not a prize. With him, she didn't have to be the perfect Hamilton daughter. She didn't have to smile when she didn't want to, didn't have to pretend to be interested in things that bored her. She could just be herself. And before she knew it, she had fallen in love. But she also knew, this love was dangerous. Her father's views were no secret. William Hamilton did not just look down on those without wealth, he had deep-rooted beliefs about status, race, and bloodlines. He spoke of tradition, of keeping legacy intact. To him, Marcus would never be good enough. And when she finally gathered the courage to tell her father about Marcus, his reaction was as brutal as she had feared. A father's wrath. The Hamilton dining room was a place where deals were made and power was exerted. It was a massive space, with long mahogany tables and high ceilings that seemed to press down on anyone who dared challenge the man who ruled it. That evening, as Isabel sat across from her father, she knew she was about to enter a war she could never win. "I'm engaged," she said, voice steady. Her mother, Eleanor, barely lifted her gaze from her wine glass. But her father stilled, setting down his knife and fork with measured precision. "To whom?" She swallowed. "Marcus Reed." Silence. Then, a slow, cold chuckle. "Marcus Reed," her father repeated, as if the name itself was a joke. "The tech businessman?" She nodded. Then, his expression turned to steel. "No." Isabel stiffened. "Father, I'm not asking for permission." His jaw tightened. "You think you love him?" "Love is fleeting, Isabel. Marriage is a contract. A business agreement. You don't marry someone because of feelings. You marry someone who will continue our legacy." Her hands curled into fists beneath the table. "I'm not a business deal, Father. And I will marry him, with or without your blessing." William Hamilton had never been a man to tolerate defiance. His gaze sharpened into something almost dangerous. "If you walk down that aisle with him, you will cease to be my daughter." The words hit her like a knife to the chest. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then, she stood. "Then I guess this is goodbye." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out. But as she did, she heard her father's cold voice echo behind her. "This isn't over." And she knew, deep in her heart, he meant it, the wedding of defiance. The day of Isabel Hamilton's wedding should have been a grand celebration, a social event that would be whispered about for years. Yet, as she stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, surrounded by white roses and soft candlelight, a storm raged inside her heart. The dress she wore was exquisite, hand-stitched silk, delicate lace tracing over her shoulders, a gown designed for a princess. But Isabel did not feel like a princess today. She felt like a warrior preparing for battle. Because this was not just a wedding. This was a war. Her father had made sure of that. The calm before the storm. The Hamilton estate was a fortress, and today, it was transformed into a wedding venue fit for royalty. The gardens had been adorned with thousands of fresh peonies and lilies, their fragrance drifting through the air. The guest list was a who's who of the wealthy elite, business moguls, celebrities, politicians, all gathered to witness the union of the Hamilton heiress. But there was an unspoken tension in the air. Because everyone knew this wedding was a rebellion. William Hamilton had not approved of this marriage. In fact, he had fought against it with everything he had. From the moment Isabel had left that dining table weeks ago, he had waged a war against Marcus Reed. First, he tried bribery, offering Marcus millions to walk away. Marcus refused. Then, he tried intimidation, sending powerful lawyers to dig into Marcus's past, to find something, anything, that could ruin him. But Marcus had built his success with honor, and there was no dirt to uncover. Finally, William resorted to emotional warfare. He publicly disowned Isabel. Stripped her of her inheritance. Told her mother and friends to cut her off. Yet, despite everything, she stood firm. Because this wasn't just about love anymore. This was about proving that her life was her own. A father's last stand. As the ceremony drew closer, Isabel sat in her bridal suite, breathing deeply. Then, a knock. She turned, expecting one of her bridesmaids, but instead, her mother, Eleanor Hamilton, stood in the doorway. Her mother looked as polished as ever, her hair pinned into an elegant twist, pearls draped around her neck. But her eyes, those cold, distant eyes, held something else today. Regret? Pity? You look beautiful, Eleanor said softly, stepping inside. Thank you, Isabel replied. Her mother hesitated before speaking again. Your father still wants you to reconsider. Isabel stiffened. I expected as much. Eleanor sighed, sitting beside her daughter. You know how he is. His world is built on control. This wedding, it's an embarrassment to him. A public humiliation. Isabel turned to her mother, searching her face. And what about you? Do you feel humiliated? Eleanor was silent for a long moment before finally whispering, I just want you to be happy. It was the closest thing to approval she had ever received from her mother. Then, another knock. This time, the air changed. Because when the door opened, William Hamilton stepped inside. He did not look like a father coming to bless his daughter's wedding. He looked like a king delivering his final warning. The silence in the room was suffocating. I hope you understand what you are doing, he said, his voice quiet yet sharp as a blade. Isabel met his gaze. I understand perfectly. William studied her, his blue eyes cold and calculating. You are throwing away everything for a man who will never be worthy of you. I am choosing my own future. His jaw tightened. You think this is love? Love fades, Isabel. But power is eternal. She lifted her chin. I don't care about power. His lips curled into a humorless smile. Then you are a fool. He stepped closer, his voice dropping into a whisper. If you go through with this, I will make sure that you regret it. I will destroy him. I will erase his name from every business deal, blacklist him from every industry. When I am finished, he will have nothing. Isabel's heart pounded. If you do that, I will never forgive you. He exhaled sharply, as if disappointed. Forgiveness is irrelevant. I will do what is necessary. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, finally, Isabel said the words that sealed her fate. Then I will do what is necessary, too. And with that, her father turned and walked out. The wedding begins. Outside, the ceremony had begun. Guests were seated, whispers filling the air. Some had expected Isabel to change her mind at the last moment, to bow under her father's pressure. But as the music swelled, as she stepped out in her white gown, holding her bouquet of roses, there was no hesitation in her steps. Because she was ready. At the end of the aisle, Marcus waited for her. His eyes were steady, full of quiet strength. He had always told her, if you choose me, I will never let you regret it. And looking at him now, she knew, he never would. But as she walked closer, something felt wrong. A sudden movement caught her eye. At the very front row, her father had stood up. And before the priest could even speak, William Hamilton did something unthinkable. He raised his hand and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. I object. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The guests turned, murmuring in shock. Isabel's heart stopped. She turned to her father, her hands tightening around the bouquet. Father. But William wasn't looking at her. He was looking directly at Marcus. And then, in a voice filled with disdain and finality, he said. This man is a fraud. And I will not allow my daughter to marry a liar. Silence. Then, the room erupted. Guests whispered furiously. Some gasped. Others exchanged stunned glances. Marcus, for the first time, looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? Isabel demanded. Her father smirked, stepping forward, his voice echoing across the room. This man, Marcus Reed, is not who he says he is. And with those words, he pulled out a thick envelope and tossed it onto the altar. Marcus picked it up and flipped through the papers, his face darkening with each page. Whatever was written there. It was bad. And in that moment, Isabel felt something she had never felt before. Fear. Because, for the first time, she wasn't sure if her father was lying, secrets unveiled. The wedding that should have been a celebration of love had turned into a battleground of betrayal. The air inside the Hamilton Estates grand ballroom was thick with tension, guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The murmurs had become a low roar of speculation. Had Marcus Reed truly lied? Had Isabel thrown away her fortune, her family, her entire world, for a fraud? She could feel every set of eyes burning into her, waiting for her reaction. But she wasn't afraid. Not yet. Because she knew Marcus. She knew the man she was about to marry. Didn't she? A father's smirk, a groom's silence. Isabel's father, William Hamilton, stood tall at the front of the wedding hall, his expression one of pure satisfaction. This was his moment, his final trump card, played at the perfect time. He had always been a master strategist, a man who never lost. And today was no exception. He turned to the crowd, addressing them as if he were delivering a corporate speech. Ladies and gentlemen, I did not come here today to ruin my daughter's wedding. I came here to protect her. His voice was calm, calculated. Because this man standing beside her is nothing but a con artist. Gasps rippled through the guests. Isabel snapped her gaze to Marcus, searching his face, her heart hammering. But he didn't speak. Why wasn't he denying it? Why wasn't he fighting back? The silence was more deafening than the accusations. The mysterious papers. Isabel's fingers clenched into fists. Enough. She stormed toward the altar, snatching the thick envelope from Marcus's hands. The papers inside, proof of her father's claims, felt heavier than steel. She flipped through them, her stomach twisting. Financial records. Names. Bank transfers. A police report. She scanned the words, her breath catching on one particular sentence. Marcus Reed, formerly known as Marcus Graves, was involved in an undisclosed case involving stolen corporate funds. Stolen funds? She looked up at Marcus, her heart pounding. Marcus, is this true? Still, he said nothing. That silence, that hesitation, it was worse than any confession. Because if there was nothing to hide, he would have spoken. Her mind spun, her fingers trembling as she flipped to another page. It listed companies, stock accounts, offshore holdings, transactions she didn't understand. Everything pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Marcus had secrets. Big ones. And for the first time, she felt something crack inside her. Was this what her father had meant? Had she been blind? The moment of truth. William Hamilton turned to the guests, his voice filled with certainty. My daughter deserves better than a man who can't even defend himself. His words stung, sharp and unforgiving. And Marcus, still remained silent. Finally, Isabel turned to the man she was supposed to marry, the man she had defied her family for. Marcus, she whispered. Tell me the truth. Right now. Marcus exhaled slowly. He finally looked up, meeting her gaze. And then, he spoke. There are things I haven't told you, Isabel. Her stomach dropped. I didn't lie to you, but I also didn't tell you everything. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. William smirked, satisfied. Marcus swallowed hard. My real last name is Graves. That part is true. And, yes, there was a financial scandal involving my name. Isabel's hands shook. So my father is right? No, Marcus said firmly. He's only half right. The hidden past. Marcus took a deep breath, and for the first time, his voice filled with emotion. My parents, they weren't wealthy. They worked long hours just to get by. I grew up watching them struggle, always wondering why people like your father had everything while families like mine had nothing. His eyes darkened. So when I finally got into the corporate world, I worked harder than anyone. I built myself from nothing. I climbed my way into a financial firm that handled massive accounts. He hesitated, before dropping the bombshell. And then, I became a whistleblower. A wave of shock swept through the crowd. Even William's smirk faltered. Marcus continued. The company I worked for was involved in laundering money for powerful men. People like your father, Isabel. People who would do anything to stay at the top. William's jaw tightened. I exposed them. I went to the authorities. And they destroyed my reputation in return. He turned toward William, his voice low and sharp. I wonder why you didn't mention that part, Mr. Hamilton. Gasps. The tables had turned. Isabel's mind raced. Was this the truth? Could Marcus be telling the real story? She turned to her father. Is this true? William's expression remained unreadable. That's what liars do, Isabel. They create stories that make them sound like heroes. Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady, controlled. Or maybe you just don't like being exposed. Silence. A deep, thick silence. William Hamilton, the most powerful man in the room, was now the one on trial. Isabel's choice. Isabel felt torn in two. Her father. A man who had raised her in a world of wealth and control, a man who had never shown weakness, never admitted defeat. A man who could crush anyone with a single phone call. And Marcus. A man who had come from nothing, who had fought for what he believed in. A man who had never lied to her, but had hidden the truth. Tears burned her eyes as she looked at both of them. Then she did something that no one expected. She turned to the wedding guests. And she spoke. All of you came here today expecting a fairy tale wedding. Her voice shook, but she kept going. But this is not a fairy tale. She turned to her father. You tried to control my life. You tried to destroy Marcus because he doesn't fit your world. Then, she turned to Marcus. And you should have told me everything before today. Silence. Then, in a voice that cut through the tension like a blade, she said. But I am done being controlled. By either of you. She turned. And, in front of hundreds of guests, cameras, and the weight of her entire family legacy, Isabel Hamilton walked away from both men. And for the first time in her life, she was free. The cost of freedom. The doors of the Hamilton estate slammed shut behind Isabel as she walked out of her own wedding. The sound echoed through the grand hall, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Inside, the guests sat frozen in shock. No one had expected this. No one had imagined that the bride, the heiress to the Hamilton fortune, would walk away not just from her father's control, but from her own groom. But she had. She had chosen herself. The moment she stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapped around her, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. She inhaled deeply, as if breathing for the first time. Her designer heels clicked against the stone pathway as she strode across the estate grounds, her heart hammering in her chest. The manicured gardens, the towering fountains, the elaborate decorations, all of it felt foreign now, like a dream she no longer belonged to. The wedding guests inside had been whispering, gossiping. Her father would be furious. The media would have a field day. And Marcus. She still couldn't process the betrayal she felt. Was it betrayal? Or was it just the weight of the truth crashing down all at once? She wasn't sure. A world she never knew. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. 100 missed calls. Dozens of texts. She ignored them all. She kept walking, moving further from the grand estate, down the winding driveway lined with expensive cars. She didn't care where she was going. She just needed to go. And then, just as she reached the iron gates, a voice stopped her. Isabel. She froze. It was Marcus. She turned slowly, seeing him standing a few feet away. The dim glow of the estate lights cast long shadows across his face, making him look more exhausted than she had ever seen him. His tuxedo was slightly undone, his bow tie hanging loosely around his neck. He looked like a man who had just lost everything. Just like her. A reckoning. She swallowed hard. Did you follow me out here? Marcus nodded once. I had to. Silence stretched between them. The tension between them wasn't just about tonight. It wasn't just about what her father had done. It was about the choices they had made. About the truths they had hidden. Isabel's voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. You lied to me, Marcus. His jaw tightened. I didn't lie. I didn't tell you everything. Isn't that the same thing? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. I was going to tell you, Isabel. But I was afraid. I didn't want to bring you into it. Her eyes burned. Bring me into what? You said you were a whistleblower, but my father made it sound like you were involved in something illegal. Which one is it? Marcus's expression darkened. Your father is twisting the truth. Then tell me the real truth, Marcus. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, finally, he spoke. The weight of the past. My company was laundering money for high-profile clients. People with power. I found out about it, and I reported it. Isabel's stomach churned. Marcus continued, his voice low. At first, I thought I did the right thing. But instead of justice, I got destroyed. My name was erased from every good thing I had done. They blamed me for financial fraud, framed me for something I never did. And your father? He trailed off, his jaw clenching. What about my father? Isabel pressed. Marcus met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw it. The raw anger. The pain. Your father was one of the people I exposed. The ground felt like it shifted beneath her feet. She staggered back a step. What? He wasn't the only one, Marcus said. But he was part of it. The money laundering. The corruption. His company had offshore accounts funneling money through fake charities. I uncovered the truth, and I was punished for it. Isabel could barely breathe. Her father, the man she had spent her whole life trying to please, was a criminal? Her hands shook as she tried to process it all. If that's true, then, why didn't you tell me sooner? Marcus's voice was gentle now. Because I love you, Isabel. And I didn't want you to have to choose between me and your family. Tears burned in her eyes. But I did. And I had to do it in front of hundreds of people, Marcus. At my own wedding. His expression softened. I know. Isabel exhaled shakily, shaking her head. I don't know what to believe anymore. Marcus stepped closer. Then believe in yourself, Isabel. Because that's what your father has never let you do. Her chest ached at his words. Because she knew he was right. The breaking point. Suddenly, bright lights flashed in the distance. The roar of a car engine cut through the silence. Both Isabel and Marcus turned to see a sleek black Rolls-Royce speeding down the driveway. Her father. The car screeched to a halt just feet away from them. The driver's door swung open violently, and William Hamilton stormed out. His expression was a mask of pure fury. "You," he growled, pointing directly at Marcus. "Stay away from my daughter." Marcus didn't move. "She's not yours to control, Hamilton." William's eyes darkened. "You ruined her. You humiliated her tonight. And now you think you can steal her away from everything she was born into?" Isabel had heard enough. She stepped forward, standing between them. "No, father," she said firmly. "I think you are the one who ruined everything." His gaze snapped to her, disbelief flashing across his face. "Isabel, don't be ridiculous. You're upset. You don't know what you're saying." "No," she said, her voice steady. "For the first time, I know exactly what I'm saying." She took a deep breath. "I'm done being controlled by you." Her father's face darkened. "If you walk away from this family, you'll have nothing, Isabel. Do you understand that?" Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, she spoke. "Then I guess I'll start from nothing." And with those words, she turned her back on her father. And for the first time in her life, she was truly free, the road to redemption. The night air was crisp, and for the first time in her life, Isabel felt the weight of her father's control lift from her shoulders. Yet, in its place, a new weight settled, uncertainty. She had just walked away from the only life she had ever known. The Hamilton name, the fortune, the security, all of it was gone. But as she stood beside Marcus, staring at the towering estate she had once called home, she realized something. She wasn't afraid. A new path. The moment she turned her back on her father, he had shouted after her. "You'll come crawling back, Isabel. You won't last a week without me." But she hadn't looked back. Instead, Marcus had taken her hand, leading her away from the estate and into the unknown. Now, as they sat in his modest apartment, a stark contrast to the grand mansion she had left behind, Isabel felt the first pangs of reality sinking in. The apartment was small but warm. A bookshelf stacked with law books lined one wall, a cozy couch sat near the window, and a coffee table held a stack of neatly organized papers. It wasn't luxurious, but it was real. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked softly. Isabel hesitated. Her life had just changed forever. But when she thought about going back, returning to a life where her every decision was controlled, where love was conditional, where she was nothing more than a pawn in her father's empire, the answer became clear. "I'm sure," she whispered. Marcus exhaled, relief flickering in his eyes. "Then we'll figure this out together." The fallout. The media erupted the next morning. Heiress walks out on wedding, leaves family name behind. Isabel Hamilton disowns father, chooses love over money. William Hamilton's empire shaken after daughter exposes family secrets. Every major news outlet covered the story. And the headlines weren't just about her anymore. They were about her father. Marcus had told her the truth about his past, about the corruption, the fraud, the money laundering that her father had been a part of. And now? Now, people were digging. Reporters started investigating. Whistleblowers came forward. Lawsuits were filed. The empire William Hamilton had spent decades building was beginning to crumble. The consequences of truth. Days passed. Then weeks. Isabel had no contact with her father. But then, one evening, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? A long pause. Then a voice she knew all too well. Isabel. Her father. His voice was different. Not the commanding, confident tone she had known all her life. This time, it was strained. I need to see you, he said. She almost laughed. After everything? After he humiliated Marcus at the wedding? After he told her she was worthless without his name? No, she said flatly. Isabel, please. Please. Her father had never said please in his life. She hesitated, her fingers gripping the phone tightly. Why should I? Silence. Then, finally, he spoke. Because I was wrong. A father's confession. The next day, Isabel found herself standing outside a hotel suite, heart pounding. She wasn't sure why she had come. Maybe part of her still needed closure. When the door opened, she barely recognized the man standing before her. William Hamilton, once the invincible billionaire, looked defeated. His hair was grayer, his suit slightly wrinkled. His eyes, once filled with cold authority, now carried something else. Regret. He stepped aside, allowing her in. The suite was lavish, but it felt empty. There were no assistants, no bodyguards. Just him. I won't waste your time, he said, pouring himself a drink. You were right. Isabel crossed her arms. About what? He exhaled. Everything. He set the glass down, rubbing his temples. The SEC is investigating me. The company's stock has plummeted. I've lost major investors. A bitter laugh escaped him. The Hamilton name doesn't mean much anymore. Isabel felt nothing. No sympathy. No sadness. Only vindication. I spent my life building an empire, he continued. And in one night, you tore it all down. Her jaw clenched. I didn't tear it down. You did. For the first time, her father had no argument. He nodded slowly. You're right. She didn't expect him to admit it. Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, he sighed. I was a fool. Isabel raised an eyebrow. Now you realize that? Her father ran a hand through his hair. You were my daughter, Isabel. My only child. And instead of loving you, I tried to control you. His voice was raw now. I thought power meant everything. I thought money could solve any problem. But the truth is... He let out a shaky breath. The only thing I had that was truly valuable was you. And now I've lost you, too. Isabel stared at him. She had spent years dreaming of this moment. The moment he would finally admit his mistakes. But now that it was here, she didn't feel triumphant. She just felt done. Moving forward. I don't hate you, Isabel said after a long pause. Her father looked up, startled. But I can't forgive you either. Not yet. His face fell. She exhaled. I spent my whole life trying to make you proud. But I was never going to be enough for you. And I've finally accepted that. Tears burned in her eyes. I don't need your approval anymore, Dad. For the first time, William Hamilton had nothing to say. Isabel turned to leave. As she reached the door, her father's voice stopped her. Isabel. She turned slightly. I hope, one day, you'll come back. She swallowed the lump in her throat. She wouldn't. But maybe, just maybe, he could change. Without another word, she walked away, stepping into a new future. A new legacy. The crisp autumn air brushed against Isabel's skin as she stepped out of the hotel. The sky above her was a mix of deep blues and fading oranges, a beautiful contrast that mirrored her own emotions, a blend of peace and uncertainty. She had just walked away from her father, likely for the last time. And yet, despite everything, she didn't feel empty. For the first time in her life, she felt free. Rebuilding from nothing. Life after leaving the Hamilton name behind was an adjustment. No more private chauffeurs. No more extravagant shopping sprees. No more luxurious galas where she was expected to smile and nod at conversations she had no interest in. Instead, her days were filled with learning how to survive on her own. She got her first real job, an entry-level position at a non-profit legal firm. It wasn't glamorous. She wasn't making six figures. But it was honest work. And for the first time, she wasn't just existing, she was living. Marcus, ever supportive, worked late nights on high-profile cases while she handled administrative tasks and legal research for underprivileged families seeking justice. She had gone from a world of wealth and privilege to one where people fought for basic human rights. And yet, she had never felt more fulfilled. Marcus' rise to power. 1 year passed. Then 2. The world changed. Marcus had built a name for himself, not just as a lawyer but as a champion for the people. His victories in court were legendary. Corrupt corporations, discriminatory policies, racial injustices, he took them all on and won. He became a household name, the voice of the unheard. And then, the impossible happened. He was offered a judgeship. A young black man from humble beginnings, standing at the threshold of one of the most powerful legal positions in the country. Isabel could barely believe it. "Are you sure about this?" she asked him one night as they sat on their modest couch, her fingers intertwined with his. Marcus exhaled. "I never set out to be a judge. I just wanted to fight for justice." She studied him. "And now you can do it on an even greater level." His eyes met hers, full of love and determination. "I wouldn't be here without you." Her heart swelled. "And I wouldn't be who I am without you." They had built this life together. No wealth. No family empire. Just love, resilience, and purpose. The fall of William Hamilton. While Marcus was rising, her father was falling. His company, once an untouchable empire, was now a sinking ship. The SEC had launched multiple investigations. Investors had pulled out. Lawsuits were stacking up. And then, the final blow came: criminal charges. Embezzlement. Fraud. Tax evasion. William Hamilton was arrested. The once mighty businessman, the same man who had sneered at Marcus for being beneath their family, was now standing trial in an orange jumpsuit. Isabel had no sympathy. But she did watch the trial. Not for revenge. But for closure. The courtroom was filled with reporters and former business associates who once groveled at his feet. Now, they whispered about his downfall. Her father sat at the defendant's table, his powerful presence reduced to that of a defeated man. And when the verdict came in, guilty on all charges, he didn't even flinch. The last remnants of the Hamilton legacy crumbled that day. But Isabel didn't mourn it. Because she was never truly a Hamilton. She was just Isabel. A new chapter. Years passed. Marcus was now Judge Marcus Taylor. Isabel had risen in her own right, becoming a fierce advocate for underprivileged communities, helping build policies that ensured wealth didn't dictate justice. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Marcus turned to her with a soft smile. "You never told me," he said. "Do you regret it?" She raised an eyebrow. "Regret what?" "Walking away from all of it. Your family's fortune. Your old life." She thought for a moment. Then she smiled. "No. Not for a second." She reached for his hand, fingers lacing through his. I didn't walk away from something. I walked toward something better. And as they sat together, their future stretched out before them, Isabel knew one thing for certain. She had lost a father, lost a fortune, and lost a name. But in return, she had gained everything that truly mattered.